You're listening to The LowDown, a podcast inspired by the creative people in the bass making community. I'm Frankie. I'll be sitting down with bass makers to explore what drives them creatively and to find out what challenges they face in the business of bass. Let's find out what it's all about. Let's get The LowDown. Hey, welcome to The LowDown. As usual, Eric and I are here, and Eric is outside. Lucky Eric. And we are lucky enough to have Terry Mashek here today, and from Tundra Guitars. Terry, pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Fantastic. So what part of the country are you in?
I live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and cool. South Dakota is where God goes to get away from it all. Sioux Falls is on the eastern edge of the state, and most people, when they think of South Dakota, think of Mount Rushmore, which is 400 miles away on the other side of the state. So
what's 400 miles, right?
Yeah.
So I gotta say, leading up to the podcast, you were pretty adamant that, hey, I'm just a hobby builder, and it might be disappointing. I mean, I've been looking at the instruments you made, and I think you're totally not giving yourself enough credit. You've made some really cool instruments.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I really, really like what you got going on there. I can see at least what I think influences some of them. Like there's kind of like a cool mash of things. Yeah, very cool. I see you made a snare drum too. That's incredibly cool. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my son. My son's a drummer, a very, very good drummer. And he challenged me a few years ago to build him a drum set. And I said, well, let me start with the snare drum. And I figured out how to do that. And now he wants the rest of the kit.
Oh boy.
But the big challenge is the jig for the snare drum is about twice the size of the snare drum. And I need one of these for each size drum that I'm building. So where do I put it all?
Fair enough. Now, did you use? It looks like, is it stave construction?
Yeah, it's stave.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I mean, you don't see a lot of that, but I think that's a great, very stable way to make a drum, ultimately too. Especially something like a snare drum that you want to be very, stable and rigid.
Well, and that sounds great, but really, it was the easiest way I could come up with without having to figure out how to bend wood. So.
Fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. Now, how long ago did you start making instruments?
I started building my first instrument in, I believe it was 2004. So, 17 years or so.
Uh-huh.
And I had, I started woodworking as a hobby. Since I was a child, really, nailing a couple sticks together to make an airplane. And so now that I'm older, I can half lap a couple sticks together to make an airplane. So, I did woodworking and got more and more serious about it the older I got. In the late 90s is when I really started building some larger projects. And then in 2004, a friend of mine, I'll plug his band because that's the kind of guy I am. I'm not beyond crass commercialism. My friend,
clearly none of us are. So
that name dropping. David Zock from Remedy Drive was in town and staying at my house after a show, and I was showing him some of the woodworking projects that I'd made, a curio cabinet and a toy box and some tables and some things like that. And he said, hey, you should build me a guitar. And I thought about it, and I said, well, actually I should build me a guitar first and see if I can do it. And if I can, then I'll think about building you a guitar. And so my first guitar I built in 2004, and it plays great, it sounds great, and it's horribly ugly. So it doesn't leave the house. It's a recording only guitar.
You just described, most studio musicians from the 60s and 70s, pretty much.
Yeah, that I learned a lot with that first guitar, and I as you mentioned, I blogged almost all my instruments. There've been a couple that I got lazy and didn't, but the construction, and I go through the kind of the how-to of how I build these. Maybe not the best way to build them all, but it's how I build them all. And I learned quite a bit on that first build, and a lot of how not to do things. One of which was that when you draw something out on a piece of wood, a flat piece of wood, when you actually cut it out, it looks way different.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So that's why that first guitar isn't the most photogenic, but it is on the website.
Well, I mean, photogenic is in the eye of the beholder, which is great. I mean, I think it looks pretty cool.
It's unique.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, it's like the cutaways have a very they're very distinctive. Like you managed to have take a double cutaway type of body that is pretty common, but it doesn't look like any other double cutaways I've seen, which is like no small task, honestly. So
Well, yeah, it was. I was actually. I remember the day I was in a meeting at work years ago, and I was sketching out the outline, and yeah, that original sketch still looks better. I still got it, but it looks better than the actual guitar turned out.
Does it have a carved top? I can't quite tell.
No, it's kind of weird. It's a flat top with a rounded back.
Cool. I mean, that's
Also odd, but
I bet it's comfy, right? It sounds like it's probably kind of comfy in its own way.
I guess, yeah. It's thin. It's only an inch and a half thick, and it's light.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
Kind of like those. Remember the Ibanez Saber guitars? Those
oh
are,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's not quite that thin, but
yeah.
yes. But I
It's right
learned
there.
quite a bit on that first instrument, and my subsequent instruments, I feel have been a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a definitely something that, as we talk to more and more people, it seems like a recurring theme where that first instrument, like you were saying, is very much kind of, it ends up becoming the impetus of what not to do just as much as it is what to do. It
Right,
gives you a chance to like really kind of like rethink, what order to do things in, or how to do something differently,
right.
or what have you. And again, as I mean, there's so many different ways to do the same thing.
Exactly.
With a lot of this stuff, there's really no wrong. It's really what you prefer,
Right.
ultimately.
And so often I find myself, each instrument, I'll do something different. Maybe not because the old way I did it didn't work, but I just, like you said, I'm a hobby builder, so yeah, I'll try a new way and see if it works. Maybe it'll work better, maybe it'll work worse, but I'll know for next time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, you've got some stuff here that I like quite a bit, and I like the names too. I like the pudding base and babinga pudding and
So
banana
yeah,
pudding and
the pudding moniker.
where's that come from?
So
Other than
that kind
liking pudding as I do, but
that well that kind of came from my son. My first guitar, the banana pudding, when I painted it that yellowish cream color, I think I mentioned that the color reminded me of banana pudding. So my son started calling it banana pudding, and it stuck. And then that shape that I made for that was kind of my own shape. I was influenced, but I kind of went my own direction with that. And then so that just I started calling that's my pudding shape. And then my most recent bass that I built was I took the pudding shaped guitar and modified that, and then now that's the pudding bass.
course, it's red, so I guess if we were based in the UK, it'd be the blood pudding base maybe. But
Yeah, it actually the photos turned out a little redder looking. It's more a bright orange. My poor photo abilities, I think, didn't.
no, I think they're fine. No, but I do, I like the shape. It reminds me a bit of the like the Reverend Rumblefish, but obviously
Right.
it's a solid body as opposed to being that kind of that almost sort of Dan Electro sort of construction that Reverend does.
Oh, that first pudding banana pudding guitar was actually influenced by a Reverend that I saw. You know, and it's got that kind of that older asymmetric Fender shape.
Oh, it's very cool. It's kind of like like a vintage guitar from a parallel universe sort of vibe. You know, uh, the headstock kind of reminds me a bit of like an F bass a little bit. But I love your logo. Like I love the Tundra Man logo. I think that's
Oh,
wicked cool. Where'd you get the idea to do the logo like that? Did it just come to you,
um,
or?
a lot of people don't realize that, you know, that logo. It's the T. It's a TM,
Yeah.
and not everybody figures that out staring at it. Uh, and Tundra Man worked out to be, you know, my you know, brand, if you call it a brand, my website, my nickname, but also my initials, just coincidentally. So
Ah,
I don't remember how I came up with that logo. I came up with it, I think, on the second guitar, maybe, or maybe no, maybe it was, I think it was more around the fifth. Now that I think about it, I just started playing with some shapes, and for some reason, just using all triangles and different configurations made it kind of look caveman-esque.
yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It
Oh,
looked, it seemed like teeth almost to me. Like
oh,
there's like
right.
this, so it made me kind of think in that direction. Yeah. How did you get the nickname Tundra Man, or is that like a secret?
No, it's not a secret. When I married my wife, she grew up in Ohio, which, if you look on the map, is significantly south of South Dakota.
Fair enough.
And from Ohio, she went to college in Kentucky and then went to seminary in New Orleans, and then moved from there to South Dakota when we got married. She was very cold, not having experienced a winter such as ours, and noticed that I would go outside for hours at a time, working in the driveway, or shoveling or whatever, you know, in sub-zero temperatures, and then I'd come in, and she just started calling me the Tundra Man. Some other people started calling me Tundra Man, and so when I needed a website, well, why not?
That's awesome. It kind of strikes me that you live in a state that's South Dakota, but yet it's the most northernmost state in your wife's case that she's lived in, and it's like has South in the name. It's just kind
Yeah.
of seemingly oxymoronish, which is cool. So the cold's good for you though; it keeps you young.
Yeah, well, I say it weeds out the riffraff.
So, what are you working on currently? Like, what do you have in the works?
It's kind of interesting. I'm on a little bit of a deviation. So, guitar wise, last October, September, I started after the death of Eddie Van Halen, who was a big influence on me. You can't hear it in my playing. I don't think I sound anything like Eddie Van Halen, but you know, he's one of the guys, you know, back when I was in grade school, that really, I remember, making me want to play the guitar. So after he passed, I started building a Eddie Van Halen tribute. But rather than, you know, everybody does the Super Strat, you know, with the stripes and everything. For whatever reason, I thought that's kind of been overdone. So I started to make his a replica of his first that Amber Music Man uh,
Yeah,
that came out on the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge
yeah,
album.
which were flat tops as opposed to being the arch tops when he moved to
Right.
Ruby. Yeah,
Yeah, and you know, and it had two pickups, which, you know,
yeah,
blew
bizarre.
everybody
Yeah,
away. What's
yeah.
Eddie Van Halen need with two pickups?
Who is this imposter? Yeah.
Yeah. So I started building a replica of that guitar, and I have the body, probably about two-thirds done.
Cool.
And I ran into an issue with getting a Floyd Rose. Apparently Floyd Rose, with COVID or what, for whatever reason, basically nobody could get Floyd Rose. And so I had one on back order for 7 months, and it just showed up last Thursday. So in the meantime, that guitar kind of it's sitting on the bench. Not much progress has been made since about well, probably about December was the last time I really messed with it. And then so I just had I'm the type of guy, I always need a project. You know, it's not always about the, you know, the things I build. It's not always about the destination. It's, for me, it's the journey.
Oh, I understand that completely.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
I don't need another guitar. I've got a room full of them. But when I build one, it's the process of building one that I enjoy, you know, almost more than playing them. So the last couple of months, I've actually kind of taken a detour away from the instruments, and I've been building a full-size arcade cabinet to run all these retro games. So that's actually what's currently sitting around the shop in pieces.
Well, I mean, it's not about the destination, but the destination is always fun, right? I
But
mean, in
yeah,
terms
yeah,
of once you get there, there's fun at the end of the rainbow, basically, or at the
right.
end of the tunnel or whatever.
But even you know, when you're playing
Yeah.
the new guitar the first time, and it's fun, and you're playing it live, and you
Oh
think,
yeah.
wow, this is great. For my next one, I should do this.
Oh
And
yeah. You're always.
you're always thinking, you know, the next instrument or two ahead, because you know, for those of us who build, I think that's why we build, because you know, if it was all about the playing, we'd just go out and
Yeah.
probably spend less money and buy an instrument.
Potentially. Yeah.
And so yeah, for those of us who build, I think it's more about the journey, you know, the enjoyment of creation. You know, just like expressing yourself in music, only you're expressing yourself in another form, another medium.
Agreed. And plus, there's that cool aspect too, especially when you're making it for somebody else or making it for yourself. It's like you're making a work of art that's being used to make another work of art. You know, so it's like expression that leads to more expression in a
Right.
different way. It's just kind of a neat cyclical thing that just kind of keeps feeding itself. You know.
Right. The first time, going back to David Zock, when I made his guitar, which I believe was I made one for him, his brother, and him at the same time. The first time when I finished those guitars, delivered them to him, and met them at a concert over. They were playing over in southern Minnesota, so I drove the guitars over and presented them to them, and they liked them, and so they played them that night in the concert, and I was
Wow.
not prepared for how emotional I got watching them play my instrument. Which, I mean, it sounds corny, but
Not to me, man.
it it,
That's cool. That's cool.
it was that was pretty darn cool. That was cooler than me playing my own instrument any day. You know, the ones I've built since, I've watched other people play my instruments, uh, and it's pretty cool. But something about those first ones, that first time seeing somebody play something that you built, that was pretty incredible. Wish you could like bottle that feeling,
Oh, I know, right?
and crack it open every so often, and remind yourself of why we do this.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, and this is certainly true with folks who are doing this for a living too, where it seems like that love for doing this is ultimately still what drives them, even though they, get to a point where like this is their, their business and what they need to do to kind of like, keep food at the table and clothes on everybody and roof over the head. They still just have that same feeling when they finish something or when they're working on the next thing. It's just there's still just that love for doing it that just
Right,
going, which is awesome.
right. Well, and as a small builder, you know, I figured out early on that I could never make a living at this. And the people who do, you know, there's the old adage of how do you make $1 million building guitars? Well, you start with 2 million. Yeah.
That seems about right.
I look at uh, a friend of mine just bought a custom bass. I was looking at it, and it was pretty nice. and he told me what he paid. And I did some quick mental calculation and figured out quickly that this guy would make more money working at Taco Bell hourly than what he made building the space.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's pretty obvious that, you know, he's not doing it because he's cashing in, or
Oh,
he's
right.
not doing it for the money. He's doing it for the art. He's doing it for the love.
Oh, indeed. Well, I mean, and that's it. We touch on this, or at least we've talked about it in other podcasts too. It's like, you know, how, you know, it's hard to decide, you know, what your time is worth, you know, to make something like this. You know, as a craftsman, you know, basically how much do you have to make an hour to make this worthwhile? And you know, it's ultimately it's why you see, you know, instruments that are in the $8,000 to $10,000 range. I
Right.
think because honestly, I mean, until, you know, for folks who haven't done this sort of thing, you know, especially, you know, an instrument made from hand and from scratch, you know, gosh, you know, that's about on the nose for what it probably should be worth, you know,
Right.
ultimately,
Yeah.
if not more. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's difficult to convey that to the customer,
Yeah.
that, you know, why, you know, we look at Gibsons and say, well, boy, those are really expensive. Well, it's nothing compared to what a handmade instrument could cost.
Oh, for sure. And ultimately, I mean, I guess my answer to that would be if someone can't see the value in that, then they're probably not the right, you know, customer for to have a, you know, handmade instrument, you know, for them. You know, if they're going and buying a, you know, like something like a Sire off the shelf or something will do the trick for them. I mean, and again, there's, you know, I remember when I was starting, you know, way back in the '80s, you know, you know, cheap instruments were pretty terrible for the most
Oh
part.
yeah.
Where now, you know, cheap instruments are pretty damn good
Right.
for
I'm,
the most part, you know.
I've made that same observation to people that back my first guitar, I started playing in um, 90, right, January of 90. I'd played piano for uh, you know, years before that, um, but always wanted to play guitar, and actually had owned a guitar, but would pull it out of the closet every few months and realize I still couldn't play it and stick it back in the closet. But I finally actually decided to get serious and learn to play the thing in 90. And my first guitar was a Series 10. And I think I paid almost $300 for it in 1990. And it was terrible.
Right.
Now a $200 guitar blows away some of the top of the line stuff you were getting back in the day.
Oh, there's no question
with
about
with
that.
the modern manufacturing methods, and, you know, just quality control, what they can do now with automation. Instruments have come a long way.
Oh, no doubt. You know, and even the part of that process, you know, what I like to call the last 5%, which is like usually the most important part, like, you know, the setup and the fret work and how the nut is cut and that sort of thing, which is very, you know, labor intensive and requires a human being. You know, where since a lot of these instruments are being made in places where there's such a you know, discrepancy between what labor, you know,
Right.
costs there compared to here. I mean, you just can't compete in that realm. Obviously, you know, it just makes it pretty impossible. I know you've made a lot of like really cool like chessboards. Have you considered maybe like doing like a chessboard guitar mashup? Maybe.
I've actually considered, maybe not a chessboard mashup, but you know, doing some sort of, you know, parquet-ish, you know,
Yeah.
where you glue pieces together in a pattern and then into a larger blank, and then cut out the body from that. I've thought about it. I've just never. I guess it's never gotten high enough in the project queue
Fair enough.
to do it. The closest I got, I don't know if you read about the Walnut Stratocaster. So over on the woodworking page, I built the cremation urn for my father. And I built that out of a tree that it was a walnut tree on the farm that he grew up with, or grew up on that farm. There used to be a swing on that tree. He played on the tree and climbed on it when he was a kid. When he got older, the tree died, and he cut the tree down and had it milled into lumber, and then gave me the lumber.
Wow.
So I built when he got sick, he asked if I would build a cremation urn for him out of some of this walnut, and so I did that. So after he passed, I was looking. I had all these scraps of offcuts and stuff from this urn, just odd size pieces and things, and I just felt wrong throwing it in the burn barrel.
Yeah.
So I started gluing them together into blocks, and I made a block large enough for a body and a block big enough for a neck. That strat is made from all the offcuts from his cremation urn. So if you look at it, there's some odd spots where you wouldn't normally, if you went and bought a guitar at a store, they wouldn't glue together wood like that, in those configurations. But I was working with scraps more or less. So yeah, so I made, that's the closest I've come to, like, sticking chunks of wood together to build a guitar.
Well, I mean, but the story behind it's really beautiful, though. If just considering that tree, and it basically, your dad's a part of that tree,
Right.
right?
Well, and then
So
some people think it's cool, and some people think
yeah,
it's morbid, and I guess that's up to however the viewer wants to decide. But I did, under the pick guard, I put a cavity there, and I put some of my dad's ashes in there.
wow, yeah,
With a note explaining what they are, in case I pass away and somebody gets his guitar and takes the pickguard off and thinks it's somebody's stash or something.
So I've been sitting here listening, and just sort of fascinated by the story thus far. You've been putting just sort of putting the color around, what's been motivating you, which, where you're at today. I was kind of curious, in terms of like turning this into like like what you're doing next, right? What's the thing that's sort of driving you forward into some of the new projects, and then I'm particularly curious around the business side of things, like you know how do you, for example, market, quote unquote, right? So we talked to so many people on this podcast where we talk about, like, word of mouth marketing, or they've gotten the word out based on their work that they've been doing. Some of them are just sort of keeping up with demand. Some people are out there actually doing active promotion to build demand. And what would you have to say to somebody who's listening, who's just getting started, who would like to build up a group or a customer base that they, outside of friends and family, right? Because everybody
Right.
starts there. Outside of friends and family, what's the next?
Right. And I think that's a tough question for me to answer, because I don't think I've done a real great job of that myself. Early on, I actually tried to do this as a business, and I built 4 guitars I had 4 people lined up who said, "Hey, I want you to build me a guitar." And I thought, great, I'm going to start this business. So I built those guitars and sold them to those people, and then pretty much didn't have anything, as far as customer wise. I used up my customers, and I didn't have really any leads, or didn't have any knowledge of how to market myself. And after a couple years, I just kind of decided, if somebody contacts me, I'll build them a guitar. But if it's the right fit, Um, but for me, I've kind of lost the. I don't want to say I've lost the dream. That sounds so negative. But
Sort of the commercial aspiration.
right,
Yeah.
I've just decided you know, I've got a day job. I'm at my workplace now. And that pays the bills. And so I build as an escape from work, as an escape from day to day. I'm not aggressively marketing my instruments. Like I said, if somebody wants me to build one and it's the right fit for both of us, we can probably work something out. But at the same time, I'm not going to be advertising on Reverb, Craigslist, or however people. I don't even know how people, individual builders market themselves these days because I haven't even looked into it.
Right. Well, I think that's the interesting thing, right? Is so those are the usual places, right? Craigslist, Reverb, However, if you think about it, those are not the places that are going to contain people that are going to sort of fully appreciate your work with their checkbooks, right?
Right.
And so, really, the audience that you're going after, the customer that you're going after, is somebody who, like we talked about earlier in this episode, are really excited about the unique aspect of what you're building, and they buy into what you're doing behind
Right.
behind a brand. And so the way that I've seen success, from talking to tons of people, is there's uh, a real simple but really effective thing that most people don't do, and that is you start talking. It's something you just said earlier in this episode that was really interesting to me. That you said, I love writing, right? There's that, and that's the story that you're telling around the product that you're making, right? And so when you again, just sort of tactically for people who are listening or whatnot, things that I've just this one thing that I've learned is have a small community or email list of people that you talk to, right? And I know it sounds daunting, like, how do I do that? And, capture emails and like all this other kind of stuff. But, really it's super simple. There's tons of tools out there to do it. But the key is really not in the tactic. The key is in the story that you're telling. The conversation that we're having now, if you could put that into a series of emails and talk about the same things that we just talked about today, over the course of, you know, really that's like 3 months worth of content, right? Where you're sending these out and you're not like selling. That's the thing that everybody hates, right? Is like, please buy all my stuff, please buy all my stuff. Nobody wants that. You don't want that as a consumer. I don't want that as a consumer. So what you're wanting instead is for people who are genuinely interested in what you're doing to reach out to you, and the way that you do that is by telling your story. They
Right.
will absolutely uh, come alongside of you and absolutely start reaching out, and they will absolutely start wanting to have genuine conversations about what you're doing, what you're working on. And those conversations, you know just like with word of mouth, just like real relationships turn into something that you know where they pick up the phone and they call you and they say, hey, what are you doing about this? Or, hey, I've got my son's graduating and I would love to do this. Is there something that you could build 6 months from now, or whatever? And so that's the if you were to do that, if you were, like, I'm not saying you are, but if you were, that's one of the most powerful ways. It really is. And there's tons of other little tactics like that are super effective, and I think really importantly, genuine, right? Like interactions that you want to have with people. Again, the same way that you would want to be treated, right? It's sort of like
Right.
the golden rule. I have a like a very firm "don't be smarmy" policy, right? Like we don't like actively call people and try to sell them stuff. We don't do that. And all we're trying to do is just genuinely provide like good advice, good content, like, just talk to them, like real human beings, and there's sort of a, something that flows out of that, I think. And you can add structure, and you can do smart things, that in addition, but in general, it really does boil down to that. And it's funny, like Frankie and I have talked about this for a long time, but I've been threatening to put together like a builder's tips of the trade sort of thing. That it's like, okay, I built my, I've got this thing figured out. Like I've got my craft sort of honed in. If I wanted to take this thing to the next level, what would I do? And like, how do I even, like, outside of your friends and family initial network,
Right.
um, it's like, in order to actually turn it into a business that actually supports you or your family, like, or your sort of your vision, like, what are the things you do? What are the steps you take? What are the things you sort of need to tick off, the boxes to have success in those things? And I really want to find time. I swear I'm going to just go on vacation. I'm going to like spit all this stuff out one day.
You're not going on vacation. I don't believe it for a second.
I'm gonna come up to Maine in the summer is what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna sit somewhere, in a beach chair, and I'm gonna have like lobster rolls or something, and I'm just going to.
If that doesn't get old, by the way.
I know, right? I'm
No.
gonna come up and visit Frankie, and so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna like jot all this stuff down. I'm gonna put it in like a little packet or something that I can hand out to people that are trying to get started, especially the ones that are trying to get started. Like, they've sort of got all the stuff figured out, but they're trying to take it to the next level and
Right.
turn it into something, because I think there's a lot of people out there that want to do that. They love what they do, but yet, they haven't figured out a way to turn it into something that supports them and replaces their immediate income from their day job. Um, and there's so many people that are like trying to make that leap. I feel like that would be super helpful to people.
Conflicts that I've heard other builders talk about is if they're selling, they're not building, and if they're building, they're not selling. And it can be difficult for a single person operation to handle the workload of both of those
A lot of
activities.
hats.
One of the things that I was thinking about, that for people just starting to build now, back when I started, the internet wasn't near as mature as it is now. And one of the reasons I started blogging and showing and describing all the construction steps on my guitars is that back when I started, I didn't have a site like this that I could go
Right.
look at. There was the Musical Instrument Makers Forum at the time, but it didn't really do much in step by step. But really, that's about the only resource I can think of from way back then. I couldn't go to YouTube. I don't think YouTube existed when I started. If it did, it was basically a URL nobody'd heard of. So, most of my construction, most of my learning came from my woodworking experience, and I bought Melvin Hiscock's
Yeah,
book,
it's great.
which,
Great book.
which you need to, if you don't own that book, you need to own that book. That's one of the great things about if I were starting out now, I think my first guitar wouldn't be as rugged as it was. I'm not saying it would be perfect because I've yet to build a perfect guitar. I joke on my site that I never seem to stop making the same number of mistakes. I just seem to get better and better at figuring out how to hide them.
That's a skill, though.
I would like to stop making the mistakes if I could. That'd be awesome.
Some would argue, some folks that have been in the business, doing that for a long time, that once you get to a point, whenever that is, that you can overcome your mistakes because you're going to make them, that's kind of like, that's your professionalism right there, in a sense, where you haven't ruined the whole thing. You can figure out how to get yourself out of the problem, and it's
Right.
fixable, and no one's going to notice other than you. But I think kind of like what Eric was saying though earlier is that especially in your case, again, no one wants to force you to, like, no, you got to make a living doing this. But I think you could, even though maybe you don't see that, or maybe, but the fact that you've got the writing thing down really well. I mean, putting that, just into some emails, boy, that could go a long way. But at the same token, I completely understand the fact that there's something very appealing about just making these things for yourself and being beholden just to yourself, and not, having that pressure of, after the sale, and,
Right.
and all that sort of stuff too. So I totally get that.
But I am at the point where, I want to keep building, but at the same time, I don't need any more guitars. And
Right.
my wife really doesn't think I need any more guitars. So
Wives never do.
so yeah, there is
Sad to say.
the question of, if I keep building, what am I going to do with these things? And so I have had those thoughts of, okay, how do I continue to build, but not just, fill up a whole room in a house, another room in a house with more guitars that, you can only play so many.
Indeed. Well, I mean, have you considered, like, maybe, like, teaching, maybe taking on, like an apprentice or something? Or
Well,
with your blog, you're sort of doing that already in a way.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, that is kind of what I'm doing on my site, is a lot of teaching. Not one-on-one individual teaching, but I would hope that I'm conveying information to whoever's reading, if anybody's reading. If nothing else, at least what not to do. I have my son he's built one guitar, and I walked him through the whole thing, showed him all of that, and then he's got a bass that's almost ready for finish.
Cool.
That we've gone through. And then I did 10 years ago or so, walked a friend through building one, and he was coming over once a week for quite a while, and we'd work on his guitar.
I love how you're doing that. We with your son and just walking him through it. I mean, it's like an incredible sort of bonding time, and allows you to be able to, like, you sort of like, there's no pressure, like, because you're working on something, you're working on other things, and that conversation tends to come out, which is really cool. So yeah, I'm actually.
He hasn't come to embrace the journey as much.
How old is he? I'm sorry.
He's just turned 18.
18. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's more like, let's build this so I can play it. I want the instrument.
Yeah.
And building it.
Gratification. Yeah.
Yeah. That's.
Yep.
But he's a way better musician than I am. So
Terry, I think we're probably wrapping up here. I think maybe the final question is really, what kind of advice do you have for people who are thinking about or considering doing this for themselves, where they're actually, building for other people, and they're sort of, they've done the initial, like, honing of their craft, and they've really, like, nobody's ever 100% through the journey, right? But that they've gotten confident, right, that they can be proud of what they're producing in their art, what is it, like, do you have any recommendation, like any advice for somebody who's thinking about doing this on their own for themselves, or even going into business?
Yeah, I think my advice is more towards the person getting into it, because I don't feel like I have enough experience on the accomplished side of things, or certainly not the business side of things. Enjoy the journey, because if you're not going to enjoy the build process, then just go buy an instrument. It'll probably be cheaper, especially if you don't already have the tools. Don't go buy really expensive wood for your first guitar. Allow yourself the opportunity to make mistakes and learn.
Good advice.
Yeah. Yep. And I and I say that to tell myself that as much as anybody.
Yeah.
Don't think you need, you need a certain amount of tools, but you can start building with minimal, and you can add tools as you go. And some people, I think, get this idea that they have to go out and buy all these tools before they can do anything. And if you got a router, you need a router to build guitars.
Yeah.
Well, you could probably do it with a chisel, but you got to be really talented with a chisel
and a drill.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we've had some pretty interesting construction strategies.
I've seen. I think we may have seen most of the ways in which you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Terry, I mean, it was really great having you. I mean, I think there's just there's sort of this genuineness about you that is like definitely comes through, and you're
well. All I know how to be is me.
Well, keep doing that because you're damn good at it. So
yeah, well,
that's cool.
You.
Yeah,
I say that I leave being normal to the people who are good at it.
Thank you so much. We're super excited. Frankie and I are working really hard on putting these things together and giving you lots of interviews just like this one. We just need to get some love out there in order to get this podcast surfaced. And thanks for listening.